because a lot of our leaders don't realize that the world has changed. They are trying to take us back to a world that no longer exists. And initially in the Western world, that has basically given rise to nationalism and a whole bunch of other things. The reality of it is these are trends that cannot be stopped. You cannot stop demographic change, you cannot stop globalization, and you cannot stop, to a great extent, technology. And I'll give you an idea, because globalization is not just about immigration. Yes, there is about immigration. But if you think about it, globalization is both the greatest challenges and opportunities of tomorrow. And among the challenges happen to be COVID-19. It's global. No wall could stop it. Climate change. And so one of the big things, the second thing I've learned about is leadership. And we have to lead with soul. If you do not lead with soul, you cannot win. And there are 5 characteristics when I wrote my book, and I did a lot of research on what leadership with soul means. And the 5 characteristics are, and I would have you think about these, apply them to yourself, to your bosses, to your leaders, to your politicians, are the following. Number 1 is capability, which is you can't be a leader unless you know what you're doing. You can't be a great doctor unless you know you're a great doctor. You can't be a great teacher unless you actually both know stuff and know how to teach, etc. So capability is important. You can't lead in an area through imagination, because then you come up with some strange things. Second is integrity. Integrity is obviously ethics and trust and values, all of which the center talks about. But integrity is also, are you data driven? Do you live in the world of reality? Do you live in the world of facts? Do you believe in science? Because imagination is fantastic when I'm writing a fantasy novel. Imagination is not fantastic when I have to deal with a virus. So that's second, which is integrity. The third is empathy. Can you think about other people? Are you connecting with other people? Because we live in a society, so empathy is extremely important. The fourth is vulnerability. We're all human. Can we accept that we make mistakes, that we move on from mistakes, and that we actually say we don't know sometimes what we're doing? And the fifth is inspiration. Because however challenging today's times are, the reality of it is that most people in the world, on average, let's say before COVID-19, say December 2019, were better off as a world than we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And to a great extent, there is a great progress in science. There's a great progress in humanity, which sometimes we don't see, and we have to remember that, and that's sort of inspiring. So the 5 characteristics of leadership are capability, integrity, empathy, vulnerability, and inspiration. So one of the key things that I'm always dealing with in the world is about the future is not fitting. The second is how do you lead? The third one is managing change. And one of the things that I truly believe is change sucks. So whenever somebody tells me that change is good, I basically let them know that I'm happy. If they want to change, go ahead, not a problem, right? But the real trick here and the real challenge, which I think we all have to be sort of aware of, and the one that I worry about, is nobody actually comes to you and says, there's this great restaurant, why don't you go to it? They normally say, there's this great restaurant, let's go together, right? Or, hey, I've discovered something, we can go together. But when they talk about change, they say, change is good, you do it. And my old stuff is, no, I'm happy, you do it. And the reason change is difficult is because when you deal with change, you don't know what you're doing. You learn new things, you make mistakes. And as a result, it's very hard, especially as you get more successful in your career, like many of you all are. You all don't want to make a fool of yourselves. You all don't want to blunder around. And so sometimes we don't change. But while change sucks, irrelevance is even worse. And one of the interesting things, Toby Sachs, who's on this, and who I worked with many, many years ago at Leo Burnett, when I worked at Publicis and I continued to be an advisor to them, I stayed there for 38 years. So you can tell me how much I hate change. My entire career was in the same place. I've lived in Chicago for 40. I met my wife 48 years ago. Like you're looking at someone who hates change. But at the very same stage, if you actually read about me, I've got the same wife and I live in the same city, but I do a lot of different things all the time. And that's because I truly believe that if you don't grow, you will become irrelevant. So keep that in mind when you're struggling with change, that it does suck, but irrelevance is even worse. And a key thing is when you are trying to drive change in your organization or for yourself, please keep the following things in mind. Just because you say change is good, your company will not change. Just because you hire a new leader, it's not going to happen. And just because you send out press releases or do mergers and acquisition, it's not going to happen. I've observed this for 38 years. I work around the world even today with CEOs of companies, and I keep reminding them, listen, people, ladies and gentlemen, that's not the way to do it. The three things that work are the following. Incentivize change. If you want people to behave differently, you have to incentivize them. You either pay them with money or with recognition or with autonomy, but you pay them. So when I was launching new things for Publicis or for Leo Burnett, I used to be running big groups as an account director with 150 people. And then one day I was sitting by myself with 2 people, myself and some other clown who followed me. I was being paid the same, right? I still was on the board. But if they basically said, okay, this thing, we want you to work in the future, but we're going to basically pay you less because there's no revenue there and there are no people there and it's risky there, I wouldn't have done it however much I wanted to do things. Because I'd say, that's really good, but who's going to pay the mortgage? Who's going to educate the kids? And that's what we forget. If in an organization you don't put your best people against the future, then you're telling me you're living in the past. If you aren't incentivizing people to do the new thing, you are basically telling me you're bogus. You're just saying shit, but nothing happens. So incentives are very important. The second is you got to explain to everybody why it's going to be difficult and what they're going to go through. It's not going to be rapid and overnight. A description I basically say is when a caterpillar turns into a butterfly, the molting stage is damned ugly. You got to tell people about that, right? Because when they get there, they're going to basically say, I want to go back to being a caterpillar. You got to tell them. And the third is training, which is you're asking me to change. Okay, you're incentivizing me, good. And you're telling me it's going to be all this horrible molting stage. But how do I learn these new skills? What training do I get? So I always look for an organization. What's your incentive plan? How much are you facing the reality of change? And how much are you investing in training? I don't want to know about your press release. I don't want to know about your M&A strategy. And I don't want to know about your new leaders. Okay, those are kind of interesting. So managing change is important. And the last thing that I spend a lot of time on, which I've learned over the years, is something that I was asked about and I began to think about, which is how come, like a person who is now somewhat older, I would say experienced, I wouldn't necessarily aged, how come I seem to understand what the hell is going on? Right? And what I began to understand was we spend a lot of our time, rightfully so, trying to look after our health, which is looking after our physical operating systems. And to look after our physical operating systems, we exercise, we watch what we eat, we try to sleep well, et cetera, right? That's very important because if you're dead, you got a problem. But on the other hand, what separates us from monkeys is our minds. We invented fire, so we didn't have to have so much energy to digest food, and we built our minds. How much time do we spend upgrading our mental operating systems? And we have to learn how to upgrade our mental operating systems. And among the things that I suggest to people is when you make a recommendation, build a case for the exact opposite of what you believe. That's really important because you'd make strong recommendations if you can go to your boss and say, here's what I recommend and here's why I think I'm. And if it's really strong, they'll actually think you've thought about it. It's also very important in today's polarized world where none of us are listening to each other. It kind of makes sense if you actually think about someone else's perspective. The other one is spend an hour doing something new every day. Or sorry, learning something new every day. And now we have time because we're not flying around. We're sitting at home, read a book, learn a new skill. And the last is try to do one new thing every day. Now, this might be a little bit more difficult because we can't move around. We'll watch a new TV show, go for a walk in a different way, order something different, cook something new. Because only when you do something new does your mind get rewired. Just like when you're traveling, you only pay attention when your itinerary gets canceled. And then you say, oh my God, what's happening? So new is when you pay attention. So those are some of the key things that I truly believe that in the world, and that's what I discuss in my book and about soul, is let's figure out that the future doesn't fit in the containers of the past. Let's figure out that change sucks, but irrelevance is even worse. That leadership is important, and that includes facing reality and leading with soul and people. And that what is very important is we need to keep improving. I will leave it at that. And I believe that all of you all who were invited to this received a little document that I wrote on called the Great Reinvention, which is putting these thoughts that I've had on what companies should do for the future post-COVID-19. And in that, I basically sort of looked at society, looked at business, and looked at people. And one of the key things, with the sponsor of this, the center, is they look at things more than business, society, people, purpose. Those are the things to look at it. And that particular piece that you'll have, I will tell you, is being used by at least 6 Fortune 500 companies out their board to discuss how to move forward. And it's only 12 pages and it's free, which is kind of odd. Okay, it's better than what most people write because this is what happens. But one of the key things is it talks about how fragile society is. It basically actually it signaled the problems of Black Lives Matter, and it was written in April. Because I just saw the data and I was beginning to realize that in Chicago, 70% of the deaths in one particular week were African-American, when only 30% of our population was African-American. Okay, then I looked at the numbers and I put them there. I said, this is something odd is going to happen. But what is tending to basically happen is there's fragility, how business and society will have to become resilient, which, by the way, I'm telling you, there's going to be universal health care, there's going to be stronger unions, and they're going to be higher taxes. I don't care whether you're a capitalist or not, that's the reality that we're going to face as we move forward, and I explain why. But most importantly is how all of you all, individually and from a business perspective, can use this time to reinvent yourself to succeed in the future. I will open it up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rishad, for what was an insightful and truly innovative talk. I feel like you were able to both bring us inside of how individuals can grow and lead, and also think about some of these big macro issues that are intersecting with these leaders. And so I would love to spend a little bit of time asking about specific big issues and how you see leadership toward those issues, and then I want to turn it over to the audience for questions.
Absolutely.
And so I want to start with your observation that there are Fortune 500 CEOs that are looking at the piece that you wrote, that are thinking about these big business and society issues. And I'm curious to hear from you kind of how you think, large companies and business as like a big idea can be really taking seriously the big issues of our time, systemic racism, and climate change among them. And, in a world where we still have, even amidst all the changes you described, ultimately a shareholder mandate for many of these leaders, and many of the, kind of constraints, quote unquote, that make it hard to, fully consider all the leadership traits you mentioned in terms of valuing all people and all. And so I'm just curious, kind of as you advise them, knowing both their integrity likely and their want to do this, but also the
constraints they have.
Exist, how do you talk with them about it?
So the way I talk to them about them is I basically talk to them in business terms, which is why a lot of them are listening to me. Mm-hmm. So what I basically say is, hey, listen, as someone who is responsible for making sure that we delivered for our shareholders, right, et cetera, I understand those constraints. But one of the things that I have proven to them is that the reason a company succeeds is because of external issues, excepting one, which is an internal issue. So the most important reason a company succeeds, which people don't pay enough attention to, is employees. So I've always basically believed that the difference between a good company and a bad company, to a great difference, can be explained by sports teams. A disproportionate share of talent commonly aligned against a common outcome, or passionately aligned against a common outcome. If you can get a disproportionate share of talent, so talent matters, passionately aligned, culture, outcome, here's what we need to go do. So you need your employees. Today, if you look at the different age groups, young people, one of the reasons why, for Black Lives Matter, you were seeing so many young people march, one you might say is because they were less likely to suffer from the virus. But I truly basically believe is that people who are younger are much more socially aware and much more caring about what company they join. There's a chapter in my book where I've done research as to why people join a company. They join a company for money, power, and fame. Even if you're young, money is money and power is recognition, and fame is recognition and power is autonomy. But why do people stay and what makes a company thrive? It's purpose, growth, and connections. What does the company do? Do I believe in it? Do I grow? Can I grow? And how am I connected to not only my bosses, but how am I connected to society? So my whole stuff is, if you want to keep and retain your best talent, you have to do this. That's number one. Number two is companies that balance what I call the story and the spreadsheet, which is a theme in my book, right? Have higher share prices, have higher stock market valuations. And I go industry after industry and say, you could be United Airlines, or you could be Southwest. You could be the old Walmart, or you could be Costco, right? You could be the old Microsoft, which was driven by the numbers by Steve Ballmer, and their stock price was at $32 for 10 years. Or you could be the new Microsoft with Satya Nadella, who got rid of staff ranking, who got rid of fighting in between, changed the culture, partnered with other people. If you read what Satya Nadella wrote about Black Lives Matter, it's the best thing any CEO has done, and I hand it to them, right? So my basic belief is you'll get better people, your stock price will go up, and most importantly, you have to think about customers and consumers, your net promoter score will go up. And so my stuff is, you can measure net promoter score, you can measure employee talent and turnover, and you can measure your stock price. Do this, those three matter. If you as a leader are telling me those three are not important, I think you should be fired.
So I want to ask one more question, then I want to turn over to the audience. I want to encourage those who are in the audience to start chatting in their questions. I'm really curious about this third connected age that you described. We obviously have many, many issues that we need business to confront today. We've already talked about a couple, like systemic racism and climate change. But what you were able to share is that you saw a lot of these issues in the trends before we began reckoning with them as a whole. And so I'm curious, as you look to the future, what do you see as the big issues that are going to be upon us? You've mentioned machine learning, which, brings a huge amount of tension potentially with workers as we look to the future. But what do you see as you look to the future that business leaders that you tell these are going to be the big issues 5 to 10 years from now, you can even start pivoting your business to be solving these issues because there are opportunities in the making?
So I basically say, I quote Shakespeare. So Shakespeare basically said, take the current when it serves or prepare to lose thy adventures, which means go with the flow man or go with the flow woman, which is, as a strategist, I define strategy as future competitive advantage. So what does the future look like? Who are you going to compete with? And what are the advantages that you're going to need to look like? So the first thing I tell them is, in an external world, you need to think about a world where increasingly silicon will replace carbon where it can, whether we like it or not. Silicon will replace carbon where it can, okay? Which basically means things will be automated where it can. And you can go to a toll booth here in New York, or in Chicago, you can go to a grocery store and you can see exactly what's happening, right? So that's one thing. So make sure that you understand that where you have to automate, you have to automate. That's number one. Number two is, the world is going to be, and your population and your customers are going to be much more diverse. Diverse in age, diverse in color, diverse in gender. On the first one, you also have to recognize that the machine will not basically buy your products and services. Therefore, you have to invest in training and building new skill sets, because man plus machine or woman plus machine beats machine. Everybody basically talks about, Deep Blue beating Boris Spassky. Boris Spassky plus Deep Blue always beats Deep Blue. Okay, so the idea basically is you must invest in training, because if not only in training for your own skill set, but those are your future customers. So that's that part of it. On this demographic shifts, make sure you have diversity in your boardroom, not just at the lower levels, but as importantly with regard to diversity, you have to have a culture where those people can speak up. Diverse faces are not the same as diverse voices, right? They got to have a culture to speak up. So that's the diversity part and the technology part. And the third is, hey, look, whether we like it or not, the world is global. And the truth of the matter is, as someone who has grown up in India, which is the world's third largest economy, who goes to China 4 times a year, right? China and India are not looking for the United States to lead the world. I'm sorry. Okay, it's 3 billion people in the world. And to a great extent, what people don't recognize is of the 20 busiest shipping ports in the world, the first time you get to a port in the United States, it's number 18. It's LA. The other 9, and only one other is in Europe. 18 of the top 20 shipping ports are in Asia and Africa. So the reality of it is, not wanting other countries to grow is not a strategy, right? So so the whole idea, and so overall, as a leader, I tell them this, which is very important. Don't tell me about uncertainty. Your job is to manage uncertainty, and life is uncertain. When you leave in the morning, it's uncertain. This whole idea of it's too uncertain, then why do we hire you? That's number one, right? Second is, the answer always is balance. It's always a balance. You're always balancing things. There is no right answer. So what I truly believe is, I'm a big believer, having gone to the University of Chicago, that I truly believe in free markets as much as you can, in capitalism as much as you can, in individual rights as much as you can. Remember, as much as you can. But at the very same stage, I believe we're living in a connected, collaborative, cooperative world. So as much as you can cannot be so extreme that you don't think about other people, you don't think about inequality, you don't think about stuff. So I believe you need to have free markets, and then you need to have the following 3 things, which happens to everybody. So this is the way I talk to people. What are the 3 things that are going to happen to everybody? Here are the 3 things that are going to happen to everybody. I don't care who you are. A, you are going to grow old. B, at some stage, you're going to grow sick. Even when you're young, you might grow sick. Third is you will suffer losses. You will lose. You might lose a job. You might lose a promotion. You might lose someone you love. You might lose a girlfriend, okay? In the human world, loss, sickness, and age is a given. It happens to 100% of the people, okay? It's one of the reasons why you have religion, but you need more than religion. And what do you need? This is what you need. You need to basically have universal health care of some sort, which we will have, because when 40 million people are unemployed at this time without health care, that's a problem. The second is you need a safety net of some sort. But the third and most important is you need education. Because I'm on this trampoline and I fall off because the world has changed. On a tightrope, give me a trampoline so I'm not killed. And then give me a way to retrain myself to play again. If you don't do that, right, you can't actually have capitalism. So, and at the University of Chicago, they have this thing they're calling, let's save capitalism from the capitalists, right? And what we basically have is no competition. We have massive domination in technology, massive domination in firms. We basically have firms deciding they're more powerful than government. None of that should work.
Well, so I want to come to our questions. I just want to mention, to your point about diversity, there's a quote I love from Verna Myers, that diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. And so to your point about actually creating the spaces for leadership and voice, I just think it speaks to it really powerfully. Sejal, Shah Myers has a question for you. Sejal, I'm going to have you ask, and then we'll go on to our next question.
Sure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rishad. I just saw, especially around the Black Lives Matter movement, that so many companies were afraid to say anything. because of fear of losing customers. And I just wondered if you had some research on that. Are they making like a false kind of positive, so to speak, by saying if I speak out, you know, I will lose customers. So many companies don't, or they were so hesitant to do so.
So I found actually, I've seen fewer companies who are not willing to speak out. I think the real reason that they were not willing to speak out was, yes, there was a certain extent some people had, which was regarding customers, okay, in certain parts of the place. But part of it was then they were, if they spoke out, they were basically asked, and can you tell us something about your own firm?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what they didn't want to do is they didn't want to throw, you know, people in glass houses shouldn't throw rocks outside or whatever it is. So they were a little concerned about their own thing, which is number one. So yes, there are some people who are not like we have a president who doesn't want to speak about it because he doesn't want to lose his gatherings or whatever people he has, right? But most companies, I think their issue was, if we speak out, how do we describe what we are doing? And one of the key things is, what are we going to actually do? So for instance, I'll give you an idea. In the Publicis group, which did speak out, we eventually showed the level of, let's say, we showed African Americans, minorities at different levels. As a French company, we're not allowed to do it in France and some parts of the world, but we're allowed to do it in the United States. So we did it in the United States. And the senior leadership is about 2.5 or 3%. And we said that doesn't work. And so what has basically happened is we're investing between $50 to $100 million. We're doing all these things over the next 3 years with benchmarks and guidelines. That is then acceptable, which is, hey, look, ourselves, we have a problem. Here is what we're investing. Here are the numbers, and here's where we're going to come out. That is what sometimes companies are grappling with. How do they do that? But my basic belief simply is this. Diversity is a strategic advantage. It's not just nice to have diverse people. Companies with diverse people do better than other companies. It's proven again and again and again. So the idea basically is you must go and get diversity, not only because it's morally right, ethically right, but oddly, it's right financially.
Our next question is going to come from Shalane Walker. Shalane? And share who you are as you welcome, and we'll do that for all future questions.
Sure. My name is Shalane Walker. I'm here in Chicago, and I'm a media director at Wavemaker. So technically one of your competitors, but I got my start at Starcom Chicago. I wanted to ask about, you talked earlier about the importance of incentives when you are trying to bring about change in your organization. And so I was curious, and it's similar to this kind of social justice lens we've been looking at things. What are some incentives that organizations and senior leadership could bring about that could, again, filter down and really lead to this change in the company culture as it relates to inclusion and having more voices at the table?
There are 3 or 4 factors, which is what I recommend. And in the chapter in my book on change, which a lot of senior managers I discuss with, these are the factors. The first and most importantly is people are modeling and watching their own behavior, which is, people watch what a leader does, what a leader says, how a leader behaves. So to a great extent, if you want people to change, whether it is to change to have more diversity or change to take more risks or change the business model, are you doing it yourself? How are you behaving? Because they're looking at that. That's number one. Number 2 is not only who are you rewarding, but who are you willing to unfortunately punish? Many companies, you're in the agency business, which I had spent many years in, and this is not just true in the agency business, it's true in every business. You have certain people who have a lot of power, and they have a lot of power usually because they control some clients or they control some key businesses. And people are very scared, and they are bad for the culture, but no one will, eliminate them. I mean, not physically, but don't take them, they make them lose their job because they have too much control and power. If a manager doesn't take out these people, then whatever they say doesn't behave. So personal behavior, and are you willing to basically include your own team? That's one. Second is to go out of your way to spotlight and promote 2 types of things. talent wherever it is that is doing the things you want them to do. That's number one. And spotlighting and promoting talent who did the things you wanted them to do and failed. Okay? And ask them to teach, and do not basically say you are therefore gone. Because when I was building teams, and as you probably know, I built some of the most amazing teams. I myself didn't do anything. It was all done by other people. But as I was building these teams, the general basic belief was that these teams had amazing people who were spotlighted, promoted, right? Who were treated like they were God's gift to this earth, while at the same time, behind the scenes, we would like go at each other and talk about how we were despicable people who didn't know what we were doing. But the reality of it is this, that's the second. And the third one is this, which is important, is continuous learning, which is a big incentive. The big thing I've learned about people is they want to grow. They want to get better. The human condition is to get better. And so I constantly say, if you take a talented person, incentivize them, behave in a way you want them to behave, right? And find them for ways to grow, everything will be fine.
So our next question is from Doug McGraw. Doug, I don't know if you're able to unmute yourself and share. If not, I can share your question. I'll pause for a second here. Okay, so Doug asks, for Publicis in the industry, what are two main integrity issues that management must address in relation to clients or employees? Are employees being incentivized properly in a time of change to do so?
So I think the biggest challenge for service businesses and the biggest integrity thing for service businesses are, you have to be very clear about how you make money. So you have to be very transparent with where you make money. Our industry, to a certain extent, lost some trust with people because they thought we were making money in ways they were not aware of. So you have to be very transparent. The reality of it is, when you do a deal with someone which has zero margin, but your company makes 20% margin, someone's going to ask, like, how did you make that? And so the whole idea is you have to be very careful that you are transparent about how you do things and what you do. That's one integrity issue. The most important integrity issue is something that I was very good at doing, and I have an entire chapter in my book. And I know this is lunchtime, but this is actually the chapter's title, so I just have to tell you this. It's called The Turd on the Table. Mm-hmm. And time after time, I found that we were either scared of clients, scared of bosses, scared of what people would say, and we knew what the truth was. There was this brown, moist thing in the middle of the table, and everybody pretended it was a brownie, but it was a piece of shit, right? And we didn't call it out. And when that happens, entire companies get destroyed, including most recently, not destroyed, but hurt, is Boeing. They knew the 737 MAX problem. Now look at their email chain. Look at Wells Fargo opening fake accounts. So the biggest integrity issue is tell the truth, even if it hurts.
And can I ask a follow-up, Rishad,
Sure.
on client services? How do you think about these issues in the context of client services, which is often very driven by clients? I was a McKinsey consultant for a number of years. That was said to be our top interest, was serving clients' interests. Yes. And obviously, you've probably read the number of stories from ProPublica and the New York Times in places where we serve clients that, I don't think align with the values, at least of most of society. And so I'm curious how you think about the guardrails in client services, especially.
So I believe there are two parts of it. It's one of the reasons why I emphasize both people in the trenches and leadership, because sometimes people in the trenches, because of both the magnetic power of clients, because they have less options, I need to pay my mortgage, I need to keep my job, right? Can be swayed sometimes to what they call in Star Wars, the dark side, okay? But it's very important that the company somewhere has a Yoda or an Obi-Wan Kenobi who basically says, this is not the way, right? This bad force is not the way. We have to get to the good force. It was in the case of McKinsey, a crisis of leadership. It wasn't necessarily what they did in China or what they did with opioids. It was basically a leadership crisis. And now they're beginning to handle it because their leaders became too greedy. The leaders have to go up. My job always was when somebody basically came after my team, I went after the client. I didn't go after my team. I went after the client because I told the team, your job is to tell the client the truth. If they don't like it, I'll go fight. Right? Now, if they came after the team because the team was not doing a good job, that's a different thing. But they normally don't come, they do that. So it's very, very important that we keep this in mind. And I always remind people of this. What is better in serving the client than basically telling them the truth? How can you not serve them well if you tell them the truth?
We have one final question here from Jeanette. And Jeanette, I'm going to see if you can unmute and share your question directly.
Sure, can you hear me?
We hear you perfectly.
Yes, great. So a lot of what's really been so prominent in the news is kind of the poverty of the working poor. And yet in contrast, we see, this shareholder primacy phenomenon where companies are doing quite well, yet they are employing people who are in essence working poor. So this enormous divide between the wealth within the leadership of those companies, yet they're comfortable paying wages at poverty standards. How do you articulate what defines that leadership? Is that leadership with integrity?
No, so that has changed to a great extent. It is changing, just so that you know. This problem of inequality is now in the United States approximately 15 years old. Okay, so what we had inequality starting to rise around 2003, 2004. It accelerated after 2008, 2009, and the true fault lines of how bad the situation is what COVID-19 has shown. To a great extent. And what is tending to basically happen is there is a massive backlash, both from people, etc. So the piece that I've written, and for those who want to read it, you could just go to my website, which is my first name, second name.com, RishadTobaccowala.com, and click where it says blog. And the second piece is this reinventing piece, in case you haven't received it. It's really what the boards are discussing. It's about how you have to completely change the framework. That's the reason why boards are discussing it, because I've written it in a way that actually allows you to still look after the shareholders. In fact, I say, if you don't do this, which is looking after these things, you are not going to look. And there's lots of facts and proof as to why that's happening. So I believe we're living in a world. Now, what I will tell you is there are many examples of companies that are making these massive pivots. If there is a company that I would like you all to study, is a company called PayPal. Okay, so Dan Schumer at PayPal, what he basically did is he did an analysis and he found, to your point, even this is PayPal, quote, a technology company. Okay, but most of these technology companies, most of the money is just with a few people, but it's a technology company. He basically did an analysis and he found that 65% of PayPal's employees were in financially bad straits. And the way he decided financial bad straits is after they paid for their essentials of food and housing, they had nobody. None. And this is PayPal. And what he basically did was, over the next year or two, he raised everybody's income significantly. That was one thing he did. He convinced the board that that's what he needed to do. He basically gave everybody equity of the company, regardless of the level. He basically provided better healthcare for lower prices. And he provided them with financial education. Watch what happened to PayPal's stock and performance after that. Okay, this is a no-brainer. This is when people tell me that my old stuff is kick the guys out, kick the ladies out. They have no imagination of how to run companies. How the hell do you basically impoverish your own people? How the hell do you basically do stuff in society where an entire generation is going to think about purpose and values and claim you are a leader? You should be kicked out now.
That's great. Thank you.
Welcome.
So, Rishad, I want to give you a chance for final comments. I just want to mention to that question, PayPal is a phenomenal example. One other documented on our website is Chobani.
Yes, that's another amazing example.
They have a similar approach. They gave out shares, and for those interested in that example, because they were an awardee this year, we have their toolkit for you, just as an additional resource. Rishad, let me give you a chance for your final thoughts here for all of us, because you've been enormously instructive so far.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, thank you for everybody for joining me. As you can see, I have a point of view. And what I would tell you is, as you all move forward in your own careers, it's very important for you all to have a perspective, as I tried to give you all with first connected age, second connected age. It's very important for you all to have a point of view, which is, what do you think, right? Don't tell me what other people think. What do you think? It's important, because you're an individual. I want to hear. So that's a perspective. A point of view. And it's also very important, and I'm sure I said certain things which may have pissed off certain people, but hopefully not badly. Is you have to provoke. You have to make people think differently, and you need a provocation. So I would basically say, as you all move forward, think about what your points of view, what your perspectives and your provocations are. And then the second is, if you want to learn more and know more, go to my website. There's a whole bunch of stuff, including talks I give at Google, interviews I do, all my writings. All of that is completely free, completely available to you all. It's rishadtobaccowala.com. And then if you want to basically help a struggling author, I'm actually not struggling, but let's suppose I'm a struggling author, you can go over to Amazon, type in RISHAD, and buy my book. Thank you.
Rishad, thank you so much for your insight and truly for your vision for the future. I hope that all of the people on this call can be the leaders that you described, with their capability, integrity, empathy, vulnerability, and most of all, inspiration. Thank you for sharing your leadership traits with us today. And we
thank you for the opportunity.
Continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Again. Bye-bye, everybody. Stay safe.
Bye, everyone.